Hello lovely people, it's Nicola back in the Stitches and Slapdashery sewing room, and today I have a little tutorial for you for a fun little chicken. I've seen triangular chicken tutorials around YouTube before. Some people are using them for pin cushions, and I just wanted to use them for decoration because I think they're really cute. You can make it as a beanbag if you sew it really well, but I don't want to be throwing mine around, so I'm not too worried about that. But if you do use it as a beanbag, use a really strong fabric and really strong stitching. I'm making mine out of quilt cotton and felt. So you only need a teeny tiny little bit of fabric and an even teeny tinier bit of felt. I have created a free PDF download for my Ko-fi shop. It's my first ever PDF that I'm going to upload to my Ko-fi shop. So this is very exciting. And it's pretty simple, but I thought you might want to have something to draw around for the beak and the comb. You could totally freestyle it. It's not difficult, but it's there if you want it. So I'll make sure there's a link under the video so that you can go and get that. Let me show you a few of the ones I have made already. This was Chicken Mark II. The first one I made, the beak and the comb were far too large and I prefer them smaller. So this gal has an orange comb and beak and embroidered eyes, 2 different fabrics for the body. She has some eco-fill in there, which is recycled polyester fiber fill, and also some flaxseed to add a little bit of extra weight. I would say if you're going to make these as a toy, just use the fiber fill, because you don't want them to be so heavy that if they get thrown and they land hard, they bust open. You'll need to use a fairly short machine stitch for this. I used 2.2, which is just the default one on my machine. You could go shorter to 2 if you felt that like your filling might seep out if you're using flaxseed or something like that. So she came out pretty well, but I wasn't sure about the embroidered eyes. Didn't particularly like it. And also, on the first one I did, I embroidered the eyes after I had put everything together, which was not the easiest way to do it. So what I have found is that the best thing to do is add any embellishments before you sew it together. So much simpler. The second one I made was this one. Now this girl is completely filled with flaxseed and she feels lovely. She's lovely and squishy. She has buttons for eyes. And I've come to the conclusion that buttons for eyes definitely look better than the embroidered versions, which, as they say, is great if you're not giving this to a small child. This would be an awesome paperweight, or just a little clucky pal to have next to your laptop or your computer keyboard on your desk. Or maybe just pop her on the windowsill next to your potted plants and enjoy the look. So yes, flaxseed gives a really, really lovely feel to it. I put, I think, about 2.5 cups of flaxseed in there, and you have to really, really try and fill this thing up as much as possible before you sew up the base, because otherwise they get a little bit of an empty-headed problem at the top. She's a little bit short on brains, this one. The last one I made is this one, and I think this one probably is my favorite. She is filled with soybeans because I ran out of flax seeds. She has yellow comb and beak, blue eyes, and I put the same fabric on both sides, but going in different directions, which I really like. And I also did a little bit of subversive embroidery on that side. And made a little bit of a pun. It says, "For Cluck's sake, go vegan." So this is slightly different in that I did put a very small amount of interfacing on the back of the fabric on this one. This is Pellon, lightweight, non-woven fusible, 906F is the number. It's very thin. And because I was going to do some embroidery on it, I thought I would like to have the stabilizer on the back of the fabric. And it worked really well. So I just cut my interfacing out a tiny bit smaller than the square of fabric and ironed it on the back of these pieces, did my embroidery, added my eye, sewed it up. And I really love the colours in this. It's just such fun colours. I've cut 2 pieces of fabric just from random ones I had lying around in my quilt collection. I don't actually think this is quilt cotton, but I thought it was kind of fun to make maybe a more traditional themed chicken with fabric that isn't too gaudy. I found some felt in my big pile of felt that I have over here and cut my little pieces out, the beak and the comb. Now the comb isn't symmetrical, it is a little taller on one side. So when we put it on our fabric, notice this is looking a little squared off here. When we put it on our fabric, we will be putting the taller side of the comb closest to the corner of our square. So I'll point that out when I'm doing it. All right, let's get going. So here's what you need. Optional template printed out from my Ko-fi shop. A little beak and a comb cut out of felt or something similar, preferably doesn't fray. 2 6-inch squares of fabric. Any fabric will do, really. It doesn't have to be quilt cotton. It helps to have a sewing machine and thread because the tighter you stitch, the better, and hand stitching might not be a close enough stitch to enable you to keep your filling in. Options for filling. You could use polyfill, beans, seeds, poly pellets, crushed walnuts if you're going to use it as a pin cushion, or anything that really works. You'll need a hand sewing needle to sew up the base after you've turned it through. Some pins are helpful. 2 buttons for the eyes or some embroidery thread, depending on your option that you're making, and the optional interfacing that I mentioned earlier. My pieces are cut. I found a couple of mismatched buttons because I might have a large button stash, but it doesn't necessarily mean I can find matching ones. And we're ready to go. So the fabric is 6 inches or 15 centimeters square, and what I do is I put the beak an inch down from the top edge of my square. You can totally mark this if you want, or you can just place it. What I like to do is use these friction pens because they iron off again. And that's really useful when you're cutting out the felt, which is going to be seen on both sides. And you might see a little bit of colour on the edge where you've drawn around your template if you made one. So the beak goes an inch down from the top of the right hand corner. And the comb goes an inch in from the top right corner, and it is a little higher on this side than that side, so I always make sure that this higher side is closest to that corner, and then I just pin that on. Now for the eye spot is just 1.25 inches from each edge. You don't have to follow my way of placing it, but you need it to be far enough away from the edge that when you are sewing your pieces together, you're not going to catch it with your sewing machine foot. So there's my eye spot. So now I just need to grab a needle and thread and sew on my buttons. I threaded my needle with a double strand of thread just to be quicker. As I said before, if you're going to be giving this to a small child or a pet, I wouldn't recommend it, but you will need to make sure there's nothing attached to it that could easily come off. I'm making these more for the artistic enjoyment rather than to have a practical result that's going to be used and abused. And I like that every one of the chickens that you make will look different and have a different personality. So there's the first side ready to go. Now I just need to put the eye on the other piece. My 2 buttons are sewn on, so all you have to do is put the right sides together, matching the buttons together, because obviously you want your eyes to be on the correct corner. And just pin those layers together. I like to just pin the corners and then fill in with the straight lines after that. So this is your top edge, here's your eye, your comb is in here. You're going to be sewing that side. You're going to be sewing this left side, and you're going to be sewing this right side. You're just going to do it in one seam. So the opening is going to be left on the bottom edge, the furthest away from your comb. Comb and beak are here, eye is here. You've got to leave this open. So we're going to sew up, across and down. Just going to reposition my pin. Want to make sure that your pieces don't shift when you're sewing. There is a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance included in the template so that you don't lose too much of the beak or the comb into the seam allowance that was intended to stick out. Kind of hard for you to see because I'm using a cream thread, but I sewed up, across and down. This part is open. Fabric is right sides together. We're looking at the wrong side, and I'm just going to trim off the top corners so that the corners push out better when I've turned it right side out. The next step is just pull this open and match your seams together. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect because you're not going to be sewing those with the machine. You're going to be hand sewing those after, but try and be accurate. So I've matched my seams together, and as you'll see, that seam is perpendicular to your original seam at the other end. You're making this 3D triangular shape. So pull that out, throw in a pin on that side, pull that out, throw in a pin on that side. So now what you're going to be doing is machine stitching a little way in here, leaving a gap, and then machine stitching here to the end. You're using a 1/4 of an inch seam again, 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and back stitch at the beginning and end of each bit of stitching, but don't do what I do and go so close to the edge that you push it into the hole underneath the needle on your sewing machine. You need to go close enough to this fold that your seeds or beans or whatever don't fall out, but you've got to be careful that it doesn't chew it up at the beginning. So I'm going to clip my other 2 corners off now. What you might find easiest is if your machine is tending to push this corner down into the hole underneath the needle and making a mess, start sewing here and go out, and then start sewing here and go out, because I think that would probably be less likely to make a mess, like mine did. So we've now got this weird shape that doesn't look like anything. We're going to turn it out the right way. Oh, there's a bean. That was a dead giveaway that I already started to put beans in and realised I hadn't turned it the right way out. Busted. I'm just going to gently push out the corners. It's getting there. I think this is going to be a really cute chicken. All right, we need it upside down. We need to put our funnel in there. Obviously, you won't need a funnel if you're using polyfill. And if you don't have a funnel, you can just make a cone of paper, get any piece of printer paper or whatever, and roll it into a cone with one end narrower than the other and tape it closed, and then poke the narrow end into your sewing. So I know that this takes at least 2 cups of beans, so let's keep going here. That's 1 cup. One and a half. Of course, I'm getting beans everywhere here. Now, one thing I didn't mention earlier was that if you're using polyfill, you'll be able to get it wet and wash it with no trouble. If you are using beans, lentils, flax seeds, whatever, you will not be able to get this wet, because otherwise it will turn into a rather disgusting moldy mess. All right, there's definitely quite a bit of space there. I'm going to have to do another, maybe another half cup even. Let's try it. It gets to the point where you have to decide how full you can get it while still allowing yourself to sew up the gap in the fabric. There, that was about 2.5 cups of beans, and that is stuffed to the brim. So what I'm going to do is pinch my seam allowances inside there, match up my seam. Pin it. You don't want it so full that you can't even pin it, really. And then I'll just make sure that this side is matched up. And then this little bit is matched up. Yep, I don't think I could fit another bean in there. Well, there she is. And now I've put my pins in, I need to get my needle and thread again. I've put a knot in the end of my thread, and I'm going to find where the end of the gap is. Pins coming out again. Here we are. That's where my stitching ended, right there. So I need to just get my knot inside the edge. You're going to do a very, very small ladder stitch. So all that means is you're going straight across the gap, taking a little bite out of the fabric, then back across to the other side, take another little bite right along the fold. And the better you can do this, the more likely it is that your filling's going to not escape later on. And that's all there is to it. Very, very simple, very, very quick. And she's done. I'm sure you can think of all sorts of ways to embellish her or give her extra character. There she is, all finished. I think she'd be really cute in different sizes. I'm very tempted to make a 12-inch one. And maybe just fill her with scraps of quilt cotton. I have a load of scraps. In fact, I made a cushion out of them and I'm currently sitting on them. But I think it would just be so much fun just to have a chicken's shaped cushion. And then maybe I could make the features a little bit bigger to allow for the bigger size of the body. But also it would be very cute in smaller sizes too, wouldn't it? Yeah, the sky's the limit with those. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Do let me know in the comments underneath the video if you make any. If you post any pictures to Instagram, make sure to tag me at Stitches and Slapdashery so I get to see them. And if anything was unclear, let me know so that I can clarify whatever needs clarifying. See you again next time. Bye for now.